Hi everybody. Hi, my name is Oscar, and I'm going to be talking about another area of glass that hopefully complements the other previous conversations that we've had here about developing for glass. And one of it is that, as you know, the glass device has a transparent display. It's amazing because you can see things over reality, but it also has this other element of trickiness to it, or things that actually change the way of how you present information. And because glass is new, we are only at the beginning of experimenting with this new medium, and therefore we're sort of like in the beginning of seeing how we present information. So why do I say that it's actually it's tricky? Well, they affect the way of how users interpret data. Because since you have light coming through, and since the display is not meant to be in front of you all the time, it's actually almost like on an angle of your eye and stuff like that. How you present information and when you present information is actually very important, because you're actually building an app because you're expecting the user to take a specific action. But in order for them to take that specific action, depending on how you design it, depending on how they took the action or not, or maybe they didn't even take the action. So in order to illustrate this point a little bit better, I will zoom this out. So if you look at the way of how Google presents its displays, it presents it this way. And this is what you see in the website, or you probably see this. But the reality is that this is how you see it. If you see here, there's a lot of light coming through, so of course this is a photo of a display, so there is some artifact that is coming through, but there's still the frame that you can see, and there is a blurriness that actually occurs here. Here on the side, if you remember, there's actually a mirror, so the mirror basically bounces back the light. And that's how you basically get to see the display there. But because of that, you get to see some blurriness here depending on how you wear it. If you have glasses, like in my case, I need to put them a little bit like this, so there's a little bit of a blurriness on this side. If you are in an environment which is a lot of light reflection, especially like a halogen type of light, I tend to see that you get a reflection here, like a sort of like a refraction. And so you might be asking yourself, yeah, Oscar, like, big deal, why is this important? This is another one where you can see the example of the blur actually being presented there, or here, or here. I think this one illustrates the blur. The reason of why this is important is because depending on how you present information, where you display, users might be doing what you expect them to do or not. And I think that's what the point that I'm trying to illustrate here. I've seen a lot of applications that present information very close to the bottom left, but actually if the bottom left tends to blur a lot for the user, and that font is actually presented in a very small size, and that's actually a very critical information that you think the user should know in order for him to take action, then that would affect how the application is being used. So, what things affect these things? Well, it's not only how it looks, because most of the time I tend to get, well, I'll just put my fonts bigger, or I'll just make bigger graphics. But it's not only about that. You might present bigger fonts, you might present cooler graphics, but to me it seems to be about the speed in which they can capture something in a matter of it's less than a second and understand it. If you need to spend a lot of time sort of focusing on what's on the display, it becomes very cumbersome. But the thing that is different is that compared to mobile and desktop, we actually sit or stand and look at the screen in a fixed way. But here in this case, actually, we're not even doing that. We're moving along, information is being presented, and we're making decisions as they basically come along into our field of view. And I think that's what's changing a little bit of the way of how things can be built and designed for this. And of course, if they're not clear, then users don't know what action to take, or maybe they take no action. So there are some things that influence this, and I'll present some examples. and see, and also talk about some ways of how you can go about this. One is the way of how the information is being presented on the screen. You could probably have less fonts, but still, if it takes a lot of time for the user to grasp what's in that screen, it basically becomes an extra effort that he needs to do, and then you might actually fail at making that user take that action. And the other one is ambient color and displays. So let me just reduce this, put it here on the side, and minimize this. So if you look at some of the samples that Google has, it has the static cards and the light cards that some of you have seen, but it also has this one called the Immersion Cards. So the Immersion Cards are actually something like this, where you have a UI that there's some information on the display, but there's also some stuff that is coming through. When you basically have ambient color and all these issues that we have with the display, and you're presenting an interface like this, things can get very complicated because you really don't know in what context the user that's going to be. Here's the ideal scenario: he's at the golf course, but what if he's in the night, or what if he's in the shade, or what if he's in a different time zone, or what if he's in a different season of the year? So all these things, unfortunately, do affect the readability and how your users take action. If you look at this here, this is another example of a golf application. It's simple, right? I mean, it just has a few lines of information, and it's not that complicated. It's simple. But if you start thinking about it, that's actually the ideal way. But mostly, if you apply what we saw from the other displays, that's not how people would see it. Actually, they would need to parse through all that information in less than a second. So think about that. Would that really work? Is all that information relevant in that moment, in that time? Do you present it in pieces? And what amount of pieces should you use to basically present this? So this is one information that I like to highlight, because this one is presenting a lot of information, but at the same time you see that it's not taking too much time to read it. By using, for example, colors, it's actually telling you which one you're actually picking, where you left. So there's a lot more information that is being transmitted, and yet the display is actually not necessarily having you to focus and see, okay, how many is this? Okay, the second line, the third line. So this is actually an interesting example of how it's still a lot of information being presented, but it can actually be read much rapidly. So this is one example where it's an immersive display where you're actually focused on something, and then you're translating something that basically appears. So in this case, what I started to do is like, I found this to be, even though it's very simple, German to English is probably not necessary, because in that moment you're just trying to focus on what you want to translate. And maybe hold your head still is probably also too much, because there's a lot of information. Remember, these are like micro seconds that are actually, it's this small slices of time that you're trying to do something very quickly. And if you should not be standing in order to perform the action. So what I did is like, well, this is actually, if you're building interfaces like this and you're building your application, you're expecting users to do things, how do you go about to sort of like get a preview of this without even having to build the code and then going through there? So what I did is that I put together this little concept here, where this is actually Keynote, and I put together like a little graphic here. And so I basically redid this a little bit. And then you can see that there's a see-through here, which is trying to apply the immersion sample that you saw there. And now I want to see like, how would this look without me really having to go to code or going outside, or even if I have or if I don't have glass. Today actually I don't have my glass because I decided to swap it. But if you don't have it, how can you basically see all these little issues and artifacts that the display actually has? So in order to do this, I've been developing this application on the side called Glaze. And what Glaze does is that it tries to deal with some of these issues about light and ambient color. So I'll show you a sample. So this is the application that you can run side by side, and it's actually running to 24 hours in a matter of 4 seconds. So you can see the differences of light, and not only differences of light, but I don't know if the projector makes it through, but you see that when it's lighter, the color is actually a little bit reddish, because the Google Glass, in order to compensate for the amount of a light that is out there, it projects more, and what's black actually becomes a little bit reddish. And in the night, when there's less light, what's black actually becomes black. So in a matter of seconds, I'm actually walking through that scenario very quickly in order for you to sort of like get an idea of like, how does this work? I can also walk through it through what happens when the light actually is passing through. Does it fly, or how does it work? And how do all these changes affect? And this is only with one screen. You probably have several screens in your application. So the application works in several ways, but in order to sort of like get an idea of how you can make your application more readable and test if it's actionable, you can take this and you can just say copy, and whatever appears here actually goes through here. So you get to see actually that, let me actually move it a little bit here. Okay. So you get to see that some things go through and others don't, but actually the stay still to translate, does it always need to be there? Or probably we can just indicate when you're there by actually using, you know, the little edges that you actually, you know, see here or appear here, right? Maybe we should just like change this and just delete it. And so now I'm going to say copy again. And we can see the difference in terms of like, okay, so this is one scenario. What happens when you actually move it through the other scenario? In this case, for example, this is very translucent, so almost it basically falls. It actually does not work. But in the spirit of prototyping, I think someone was actually talking about that earlier, Brenda, in terms of doing rapid prototyping. By using your existing tools, you can basically start building some of the concepts up front and sort of like starting to preview them here. If you're using tools like, for example, Android Studio, and you already have the code that is already being built, here I have a sample of the level that is actually being, it's running from here. I could just basically go here, whether I have the Android Studio connected or the device, I go to glass, and if there's no bug, there it is. So then whatever actually appears here on the on Android Studio, on the simulator, actually would appear here. So from code, you can already start testing and seeing how things work or not. And at this point, I have two different scenarios, but you can get the idea that if I start adding airport in the train station or all these other contexts, you know, you will be able to rapidly stress test your UI in a matter of seconds. That would be in the case of if you're using Android Studio, but say that you probably have a designer in the team, and the designer is actually starting to build some of the concepts before you build code in Photoshop. So I'm running Photoshop right now. So once I run Photoshop, the application detects that Photoshop is actually running, and so it asks me to connect directly to the application. And so now that I have Photoshop open, I have here like a pre-opened template for making things UI for glass. So once the window pretty much appears here, it actually immediately shows here. I could start playing with the positioning and the positioning and the layout of the text, and you can see that it automatically changes. Or if I decide to open, for example, this one, here I can start modifying things, and whatever I modify here, it basically changes in real time. So you're actually modifying things without having to launch them through code, and you're actually getting an idea of how it's going to feel like. It's not 100% like running it on glass, but if I can run through 24 hours in 10 seconds and like travel, you know, 3 different scenes and do all that in 20 minutes and get a better idea of how your application is actually readable and how does it behave under all these different environments, I think that's actually, there's a benefit of actually doing that and anticipating some problems that you might be able to find. Right now I'm building this slowly, so I'd be happy to collaborate with like any developers who are building apps that want to test it and, you know, provide feedback or see how I can tune this better. Right now I have an application that, a web page that's glaze.io, which will be opening for beta at some point. So if you're interested, feel free to visit here. But also, if you have any other suggestions or even if you have questions about dealing with transparent displays, please let me know. I'm actually very interested about this topic and hoping to help some of the issues that developers have when developing glass apps. Thank you.
Do you have a projected date for Glaze.io beta release?
Say it again, sorry?
Projected date for Glaze.io beta release.
Yeah, so I've been trying to push for in the next 2 weeks, but I'm doing this on the side, so I'm hoping that I can hit those 2 weeks, and so that's the quick answer. Yeah. Cool.
Are there other examples where you can do that simplicity of design and immediate response?
Say it again?
Are there any other platforms that are similar to this where you can design stuff and see it simulated in glass?
So here, whatever you're running from Android Studio you can see it on glass if you have it connected through USB. If you see it on glass, you're gonna see it under this time, in this context, under this light. But what the UI simulator does is that it tries to take what you have and run it through other contexts in shorter time frames, and for you to basically get a better idea. I'm going to be adding more context, like I said, like airport, or some people said like walking in the street, like going in a mall, at the kitchen, and a lot of people have been providing a lot of feedback, and that's why I'm putting it out there to see what other scenes. And I'm also thinking of adding that you add your own scene, that you have a particular glass app that runs in a particular context. And the other thing is that from what I've heard, so the folks that are interested in trying it out, they express that they're not only for testing it, but also when presenting it to other people. Other tools that I've seen that run it directly through glass, I haven't seen any. And I think the only way the other way of how you could do it would be that if you have this extension in Chrome called Send to Glass, you can get whatever image you select on your browser, you can send it to glass. And so then you will be able to preview it in the device. So whether it's an image that you built yourself or you're getting from someone else from the browser, that would be the other way to actually show it there. That's to my knowledge. But if you know of other, please let me know. Yes?
Can you also change the color of the actual glass display? I'm asking because you have red right now, that colorblind people which don't see the red as it is, and maybe in the recent background of a little gray on gray, it would be also interesting to see this kind of version.
Your question is, can I change the color of the background of what I'm showing there?
Of the glass display.
You mean the frame?
The whole picture that you have the red drawn.
Yes. Yes, so that can be changed. That is just there because that's what I have open on Photoshop. Like if I open another document, for example, this one here, whatever I open in the document will appear there.
No, I mean if you have an image processor which change the image on your application so that I can see how colorblind people would see the screen.
Oh, I see, like colorblind filters.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't have that for now. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much.